The United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, China, and countless other nations came together, not just as allies, but as a united front against tyranny. Despite cultural, political, and ideological differences, these forces recognized a truth that transcended borders. Some battles are bigger than politics, bigger than ego. They are battles for the survival of civilization itself. Imagine a world where freedom no longer exists, where tyranny rules every street, every home, every mind. Picture cities once filled with laughter and life, now silenced under the crushing weight of oppression. Children grow up knowing only fear. Schools teach loyalty to dictators instead of truth, and every word spoken in private carries the danger of punishment. Governments crumble or bend to the will of ruthless leaders, and entire populations are forced into submission. This was not a distant nightmare or a fictional story. It was the reality that faced millions in the late 1930s and early 1940s. The world was on the brink, and humanity itself seemed to hang by a thread. People everywhere felt the shadow of impending doom, yet the response to this darkness would define the course of history in ways unimaginable. Across Europe, Asia, and beyond, regimes driven by hatred and conquest began to expand without restraint. Countries were invaded, cultures threatened, and millions of innocent lives were uprooted in the pursuit of domination. Nations that had once believed themselves safe watched helplessly as entire regions fell under control of tyrannical forces. The very ideals of freedom, justice, and human dignity were under attack. Families were torn apart, neighbors betrayed neighbors, and the concept of morality was overshadowed by the cruelty of war. Cities were reduced to rubble, and in their ruins, the silent cries of those who had lost everything told a story of a world at risk of losing its soul. Yet, amidst this overwhelming despair, the seeds of resistance began to sprout. Ordinary men and women whose lives had been disrupted by invasion and occupation refused to surrender their humanity. They took extraordinary risks, smuggling food, hiding families, passing intelligence, joining underground movements, and sometimes laying down their lives for the cause of freedom. Across nations, people realized that the fight was no longer just for their own survival, but for the survival of civilization itself. Even those far from the front lines understood that if tyranny went unchallenged, no corner of the globe would remain untouched. This realization ignited a shared sense of purpose that transcended borders, cultures, and languages. It was in this context of desperation and determination that alliances were forged. Countries that had previously faced one another as rivals recognized a higher calling, to stand together against a force that threatened the world as a whole. Military strategies were coordinated across oceans, industries were mobilized to support the war effort, and societies adapted in ways that emphasized collective survival. Factories that once produced consumer goods were transformed into hubs of war production. Men and women, young and old, contributed in whatever ways they could, realizing that the stakes were nothing less than the preservation of human dignity and freedom. The very fabric of society was tested, yet it held firm, strengthened by a collective commitment to resist oppression. The scale of the struggle was unprecedented. Millions of soldiers marched into battle against forces that seemed insurmountable, while civilians endured hardships unimaginable to those who had not lived through the war. Starvation, bombings, forced relocations, and constant fear became part of daily life, and yet, in the face of these challenges, the human spirit displayed remarkable resilience. Acts of heroism, small and large, multiplied across continents. Eke, in the darkest hour of human history, when the shadow of evil stretched across continents, a united force rose to save civilization itself. The world had never witnessed such a convergence of danger and courage. From the rolling fields of Europe to the vast plains of Asia, the march of tyranny threatened to engulf every nation, every city, every home. It was a time when despair could have easily swallowed the hopes of humanity, yet amidst the chaos, a remarkable story of unity, determination, and bravery was unfolding. People from diverse backgrounds, speaking different languages and holding different beliefs, found themselves bound together by a single purpose: to confront evil and defend the principles that make life meaningful. This was not merely a military struggle. It was a fight for the very essence of what it means to be human. Across oceans and continents, nations recognized that survival depended not on isolation, but on solidarity. The United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, China, and countless other countries set aside differences and coordinated their efforts in a way that had never been seen before. Leaders convened, strategies were debated, and resources were shared, all with the understanding that the stakes were nothing less than the preservation of freedom. Ordinary citizens joined this monumental effort in every way imaginable. Factories ran day and night to supply weapons and vehicles. Volunteers delivered aid to those displaced by conflict. Nurses and doctors tended to the wounded with tireless dedication. Every act, every sacrifice, every moment of courage contributed to a larger, unprecedented alliance, a testament to humanity's capacity for cooperation in the face of existential threat. The scale of the challenge was staggering. Tyranny was relentless, spreading quickly through nations and leaving devastation in its wake. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, populations were forced into exile, and the innocent were caught in the crossfire of battles that often seemed endless. Yet the united forces did not falter. Soldiers fought with unmatched determination, knowing that they carried not only the responsibility of their own countries, but also the hopes of millions of people across the globe. They endured extreme conditions, faced overwhelming odds, and witnessed horrors that tested the limits of human endurance. Their courage was mirrored by civilians who, despite the constant threat of bombings, occupation, and deprivation, refused to abandon hope. Resistance movements sprang up in occupied territories, demonstrating that even under the heaviest oppression, the human spirit can remain unbroken. What made this unity extraordinary was not merely the alignment of military goals, but the recognition that the battle was for values far greater than territorial conquest. It was a stand for human dignity, for freedom, for the basic rights of people everywhere. Across continents, individuals understood that the fight was no longer about borders or political differences. It was about defending the very idea of civilization itself. Soldiers and civilians alike became part of a larger story, each action echoing across time as a statement of collective resolve. This sense of shared responsibility transformed fear into determination, despair into action, and ordinary people into extraordinary contributors to a global effort that would ultimately reshape the course of history. Innovation and adaptability were key components of this united struggle. Nations shared intelligence, developed strategies that crossed traditional military boundaries, and harnessed new technologies to gain advantage. Factories that once produced mundane goods were repurposed to supply tanks, planes, and medical supplies. Laboratories developed new equipment and techniques to counter emerging threats. Every aspect of society became engaged in the effort, demonstrating a level of coordination and commitment that was unprecedented in human history. This was a true global response, a demonstration that when humanity comes together for a just cause, it can overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. What does it take to stop a storm that threatens to swallow the world? In World War II, millions of ordinary people answered that question with extraordinary courage, determination, and sacrifice. This was a time when nations faced a threat so immense, so relentless, that it could have crushed hope itself. Entire societies were mobilized, and every individual, from soldiers on the front lines to civilians in the factories, played a role in confronting a force that sought to dominate and destroy. The storm was not only military but moral, challenging the very principles of freedom, justice, and human dignity. Yet, in the midst of chaos and devastation, humanity demonstrated its most resilient qualities, proving that even in the darkest hours, courage and unity can prevail. The scale of the conflict required more than individual heroism. It demanded collaboration on a global level. Countries that had previously been rivals or distant neighbors realized that no single nation could stand alone against the tide of tyranny. Alliances were forged, strategies synchronized, and resources pooled, creating a network of cooperation that spanned oceans and continents. The United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and other nations became part of a unified effort, understanding that the fight was not just for national survival, but for the survival of civilization itself. Civilians supported these efforts by taking on responsibilities that went far beyond their daily lives. Factories operated around the clock to produce weapons, vehicles, and essential supplies. Volunteers distributed food, medicine, and intelligence. Families endured rationing and separation to ensure that those on the front lines could continue their struggle. Each act, no matter how small, became part of a larger, coordinated effort to halt the storm and preserve what was most valuable to humanity. The personal sacrifices were unimaginable. Soldiers faced constant danger, witnessing death and destruction on a scale that challenged the human mind. They endured long marches, harsh weather, and relentless combat, often separated from loved ones for years. Civilians, too, suffered through bombings, forced relocations, and the fear of occupation. Cities were leveled, communities shattered, and everyday life transformed into a struggle for survival. And yet, the human spirit endured. Resistance movements formed in occupied territories, defying overwhelming odds to sabotage enemy operations and protect innocent lives. Ordinary citizens became heroes in their own right, risking everything to ensure that freedom could survive. The combined efforts of these countless individuals demonstrate that when humanity faces a crisis of unprecedented magnitude, courage and resilience can emerge from every corner of society. Innovation and adaptability were critical to confronting such an overwhelming threat. Nations developed new strategies, advanced technologies, and unprecedented coordination to counter the destructive force of their enemies. Airplanes, tanks, and naval fleets were produced on a massive scale, while intelligence agencies and codebreakers worked tirelessly to anticipate enemy movements. Laboratories and engineers pushed the boundaries of science to create weapons, communication systems, and medical treatments that could sustain the war effort. The global coordination of these resources illustrated a remarkable capacity for human ingenuity, showing that when united by a common purpose, society can overcome even the most formidable challenges. But the struggle was not only fought with weapons and strategy, it was also fought with spirit and conviction. Communities rallied together, understanding that survival depended on shared effort and sacrifice. Schools, religious institutions, and local organizations became centers of morale and support. Songs, letters, and stories kept hope alive, reminding people that they were not alone in the fight. Each act of bravery, each demonstration of solidarity, reinforced the idea that the storm could be weathered, that the forces of tyranny could be resisted, and that humanity could emerge stronger and more united than before. Each individual who stood up against injustice became part of a larger narrative, a narrative of unity, courage, and unwavering belief in a future where freedom could flourish. What made this unity extraordinary was not merely the alignment of military objectives, but the recognition that the battle was for something far greater than territory or power. It was a fight for the very ideals that define humanity: freedom, justice, dignity, and the hope for a world where future generations could live without fear. Across continents, ordinary people came to understand that this war was no longer a distant struggle. It was a challenge to the survival of civilization itself. Soldiers marching into battle carried more than weapons. They carried the responsibility of preserving human values. Civilians, enduring bombings, rationing, and the constant threat of occupation, became part of the front lines in ways that were often invisible yet profoundly significant. Every contribution, every sacrifice, every decision made under pressure became a testament to the collective determination to resist tyranny. The extraordinary nature of this global alliance lay in its diversity and the willingness of nations to look beyond differences in culture, politics, and ideology. The United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and numerous other countries, each with their own histories, ambitions, and perspectives, found common ground in the understanding that evil could not be allowed to prevail. Strategies were coordinated across oceans, battles planned in collaboration, and supplies shared in unprecedented ways. Military leaders worked tirelessly to synchronize efforts, while civilians provided critical support through industry, healthcare, intelligence, and morale. The scale of human effort required to sustain such coordination is difficult to imagine today. Yet it was this very unity that made the Allied forces capable of confronting a threat that might have otherwise seemed unstoppable. Humanity's resilience was tested on every front. Soldiers faced grueling campaigns in harsh terrain, confronting not only enemy forces but also extreme conditions, hunger, fatigue, and the psychological toll of constant danger. Civilians endured air raids, forced displacements, and shortages of essential goods, yet communities organized, adapted, and supported one another. Resistance movements emerged in occupied territories, defying oppressive forces with acts of daring bravery that saved countless lives and contributed to the broader war effort. The courage of individuals, farmers, factory workers, teachers, nurses, and children formed a mosaic of determination that collectively strengthened the Allied cause. These countless acts of devotion to freedom demonstrated that heroism is not always born on the battlefield. It can emerge in daily sacrifices, in the refusal to surrender, and in the courage to uphold what is right even when the cost is high. Innovation and adaptability became defining features of this united struggle. Scientists and engineers collaborated to develop new technologies, from aircraft and armored vehicles to communication systems and medical advancements, all aimed at providing the Allies with an edge against an aggressive enemy. Factories were repurposed to produce war materials. Laboratories worked around the clock to solve problems critical to survival. And intelligence networks coordinated efforts across vast distances. The ability of societies to mobilize knowledge, skills, and resources on a global scale reflected not only ingenuity, but also the power of collective focus and shared purpose. It was a vivid demonstration that when nations unite under a common cause, the possibilities of human achievement expand beyond what any single country or individual could accomplish. This struggle was about more than just survival. It was about protecting the principles that define civilization. People everywhere began to see themselves as participants in a shared mission that transcended borders and generations. Every battle, every strategic decision, and every act of courage contributed to a vision of a world in which freedom could endure. Communities, families, and individuals became interconnected in the global effort, understanding that their choices mattered and that their efforts could tip the balance in favor of justice and human dignity. This collective resolve, born of necessity and sustained by courage, became the backbone of a movement capable of resisting the forces that threatened to engulf the world, proving that unity and shared purpose can overcome even the greatest of adversities. The struggle was not only fought with weapons and strategy, it was also fought with spirit, conviction, and the unyielding belief that freedom was worth every sacrifice. Communities across the globe rallied together, recognizing that the survival of civilization depended on shared effort, resilience, and unwavering courage. Families adapted to a reality defined by uncertainty and danger, often going without basic necessities, so that soldiers on the front lines could be supplied and supported. Children grew up learning that the price of freedom is vigilance, that courage is not only found in armies but in homes, schools, and workplaces. The war transformed daily life into a series of choices where every small act of contribution mattered, where solidarity became a force as powerful as any weapon, and where the human spirit became an unbreakable shield against oppression. Across continents, people took on responsibilities they had never imagined. Factories operated around the clock, producing tanks, planes, ships, and munitions with astonishing speed and precision. Engineers, scientists, and laborers pushed the limits of innovation, developing technologies and strategies that would tip the scales in favor of the Allies. Meanwhile, volunteers and civilians provided vital support in countless ways, nursing the wounded, delivering supplies, gathering intelligence, and even engaging in acts of defiance behind enemy lines. Each contribution, whether large or small, became part of a larger, interconnected effort to resist tyranny. The realization that every individual had a role to play instilled a profound sense of purpose, transforming fear and uncertainty into action and despair into hope. Soldiers endured unimaginable hardships on the front lines. They faced harsh terrain, brutal weather, and relentless combat while witnessing the horrors of war firsthand. Yet their resolve remained unbroken because they understood the stakes were nothing less than the survival of human values. They fought not only for their nations, but for the ideals of freedom, justice, and dignity, knowing that failure would mean the loss of everything humanity holds dear. In occupied territories, resistance movements sprang up, often risking lives in daring acts of sabotage, intelligence gathering, and protection of civilians. These brave men and women demonstrated that heroism is not confined to the battlefield. It exists wherever courage and moral conviction confront injustice. Their actions contributed to a network of resistance that extended across borders and helped lay the groundwork for eventual victory. Innovation and adaptability were key to sustaining this struggle. Militaries developed new strategies, coordinated multinational operations, and utilized advancements in technology to outmaneuver their adversaries. Factories were transformed into production hubs for war supplies, while laboratories worked tirelessly to create weapons, vehicles, communication systems, and medical advancements. This unprecedented mobilization of knowledge and resources demonstrated the extraordinary potential of human ingenuity when driven by a common purpose. Nations shared intelligence, coordinated offensives, and learned from one another, proving that collaboration in the face of existential threat could overcome even the most formidable challenges. Every breakthrough, every successful operation, and every act of resourcefulness strengthened the united effort to preserve civilization. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this period was the spirit that kept people going despite overwhelming odds. Music, letters, stories, and acts of kindness maintained morale, reminding individuals that they were part of a collective mission greater than themselves. Communities rallied to support those in need, showing that compassion and solidarity are as essential to survival as strategy and firepower. This global wave of resilience and courage revealed a universal truth. When humanity confronts its gravest challenges, unity and purpose can transform fear into strength and despair into hope. As we reflect on the immense challenges and unimaginable sacrifices of World War II, we are reminded that the survival of civilization was never guaranteed. It was earned through courage, unity, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. Ordinary people became heroes, nations set aside differences to fight a common enemy, and countless acts of bravery, both large and small, combined to halt the tide of tyranny. The war showed us that freedom is fragile, that peace is precious, and that the values we hold dear require constant vigilance and collective effort. The story of World War II is not only a story of battles won or lost. It is a story of humanity at its finest, a testament to what can be achieved when people unite against injustice. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can prevail, courage can rise, and ordinary individuals can shape the course of history. Let us carry these lessons forward. Let us honor the sacrifices of those who came before us by standing up for justice, by protecting the freedoms we enjoy, and by remembering that civilization thrives not when one nation stands alone, but when humanity stands together. The legacy of those united forces lives on, not only in the world they saved, but in the enduring power of unity, courage, and the human spirit.